The kitchen smelled of lemon butter and roasted carrots, a scent I had hoped would wrap the evening in warmth. I had made Vera's favorite poached salmon, carefully plated beside the carrots glazed just enough to shine. A peach tart cooled on the counter, its golden crust dotted with sugar. Even the old floral linen was spread across the dining table, the one with frayed edges she used to scold me about but always secretly adored. The table was set for 6. Vera sat at the head, flanked by her bridge partner June, our cousin Lori, and 2 neighbors who had known me since I was a teenager. Glasses clinked softly as I poured the wine, my smile practiced, my hands steady despite the familiar knot in my chest. It almost felt like a family gathering, almost, until Vera lifted her glass. Her lips curved into a smirk as she swirled the wine. "To aging without baggage," she said, pausing just long enough for her gaze to lock with mine. "And to finally having a life free of dead weight. Honestly, Marin, the best gift you could give me is to leave my life." The room froze. June's cough broke the silence, Lori's fork hovered in midair. My throat tightened, but I didn't ask her to repeat it. I simply placed my napkin on the table, stood with a smile that wasn't mine, and walked to the kitchen. I rinsed my hands under cold water until they went numb, took my coat, and left without a word. That night, I didn't turn on the lights when I came home. The house was dim, shadows stretching long across the kitchen floor. I set my coat over the back of a chair and stood there for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator. The peach tart still sat on the counter, untouched, its sweet scent now cloying. I sat at the table without removing my shoes, tracing the rim of my glass with a fingertip. In my mind, I replayed the moment, her voice sharp, deliberate, aimed like an arrow meant to pierce. I wondered how many birthdays she had been waiting to say it, or if it had simply slipped out, carried by years of contempt she never bothered to disguise. Memories crowded in without permission, the candles I once lined along her porch as a child, the carefully wrapped gifts I'd made with clumsy hands, the mornings I'd woken early to surprise her with breakfast in bed. All of it dissolved under the weight of that single toast. I didn't wash the dishes. I didn't touch the tart. I climbed into bed still in my clothes, the silence pressing against me, her words echoing in my ears until sleep finally took me. I was 26 when my life quietly shifted into hers. I had been in the middle of my 2nd year of graduate school when the phone rang, Vera's voice thin and trembling. She had slipped. I thought about saying something, about how I was doing this for her, how maybe she could at least pretend to care if I made it through the drive in one piece, but I stayed silent. Words never seemed to land in this family unless they came from someone they valued. We passed through the familiar streets toward the studio, the rain tapping harder on the roof. Somewhere deep in my chest, there was a tightness I couldn't explain. Later, I'd realize it was the kind of warning your body gives you before life takes a turn you can't undo. I flicked on the turn signal to take the long curve toward the highway. The light clicked weakly. My fingers were tense around the steering wheel. And then, just as the road straightened, a pair of headlights appeared where they shouldn't have been, fast, close, and all wrong. I didn't know it then, but that moment would split my life cleanly into before and after. Rain streaked the windshield in uneven sheets, each pass of the wipers smearing the world into watercolors. I leaned forward, trying to see through the glare of headlights reflected off the slick asphalt. My knuckles were white around the steering wheel. Beside me, Zinnia scrolled through her phone, the glow lighting her face like she was in her own private world. The turn ahead curved gently to the left, bordered by a row of trees that shimmered in the rain. I eased into it, my mind already counting the minutes to her Pilates class. We were cutting it close, and Vera's voice echoed in my head like a warning siren, "She can't be late again." And then it happened. 2 beams of light burst through the mist, coming straight for us. Too close. Too fast. Too wrong. My heart slammed against my ribs. I yanked the wheel left, the tires screeching in protest. There was no time to think, only the metallic scream of bending steel and the shattering explosion of glass. The world flipped sideways in a single heartbeat. My head snapped forward, then back. Pain shot through my left arm, sharp and immediate. The seatbelt dug into my collarbone like a steel trap, holding me in place as the car skidded to a stop at an awkward angle. The silence after the crash was deafening. No music, no hum of the engine, just the soft hiss of rain and the frantic thud of my pulse in my ears. I tried to move, but a bolt of pain ripped through my leg. Something warm trickled down my shin. Blood. My breath came in shallow gasps, tasting faintly of copper. "Zania," I croaked, my voice barely audible over the rain. She was already moving, fumbling with her seatbelt. Her side of the car had taken less damage, the passenger door hanging open like a loose hinge. She clutched her wrist, sobbing, but didn't look at me. "I found my phone," she stammered, searching the seat beside her. I tried to reach out, but my left arm refused to respond. The dashboard lights flickered weakly, casting everything in a dim red glow. My phone buzzed once from somewhere under my seat, then went dead. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn blared before fading away. No one stopped. I thought about shouting for help, but my throat felt raw, every swallow scraping like sandpaper. I leaned my head back against the seat, fighting the urge to close my eyes. Part of me wanted to rest, to let the darkness take me, but another part, quieter, sharper, knew that if I let go, I might not wake up again. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the fractured windshield. My vision swam. The cold began seeping in through the ripped seams of my jeans, crawling up my legs. I wasn't sure if it was the weather or the shock. Through the blur, I saw movement. Headlights again, but this time, they were familiar. The SUV. My parents' car. Relief hit me like a second impact. They had come. I could already hear Vera's voice calling out, except she wasn't calling for me. Her tone was sharp, impatient. "Her class starts in 10 minutes. And just like that, the relief dissolved, replaced by something far colder. The SUV rolled to a stop a few yards away, headlights cutting through the curtain of rain. I waited for the sound of hurried footsteps, for someone to call my name, to tell me it would be okay. My chest ached with the hope of it. But no one came. Instead, Vera's voice sliced through the night, sharp and annoyed. "Her class starts in 10 minutes. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard, maybe she meant me, maybe she was telling Dad to call an ambulance. But then Rhett's voice answered, low and dismissive, "She's fine. The car's totaled." My heart dropped into the pit of my stomach. They weren't talking about me. They were talking about the sedan. Rain trickled down my forehead, stinging where tiny cuts had formed from the shattered glass. I tried again, forcing sound from my throat. "Mom," it was barely a whisper. Vera didn't turn toward me. Her heels clicked across the wet pavement to the passenger side, where Zania sat trembling, holding her wrist like it was a mortal wound. "Sweetheart, you're shaking. Sit up, we've got to go or we'll lose the spot." I blinked, trying to clear my vision. My leg was throbbing, warm and wet, pinned at an odd angle beneath the crumpled metal. My left arm felt like it belonged to someone else, unresponsive and heavy. "Zania," I tried again, hoping she'd at least look at me. She did, but only for a second. Then she stood, stepping carefully over my bleeding leg as if I were nothing more than an obstacle in her path. Her favorite Lululemon leggings brushed against my skin as she moved past. She didn't flinch. Didn't apologize. The SUV door opened, the leather creaked as she climbed in. The slam of it echoed louder than the rain. "If she can drive into a wreck, she can crawl out," Rhett said, his voice flat, final. That was the moment the cold seeped into my bones, not from the rain, but from the realization that they weren't here to help me. They'd come only for her. I watched through the cracked windshield as the SUV reversed, its taillights glowing red in the mist. The engine's low hum faded until all I could hear was the rain hitting the broken glass around me. It was the kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it hollows you out. I don't remember how long I sat there, half pinned and half soaked. My teeth began to chatter, not from the chill, but from something deeper, shock that stripped away the sense of being alive. I pressed my free hand against my thigh, trying to slow the warm seep of blood. 20 minutes passed before another pair of headlights appeared. This time, the driver pulled over immediately. A woman in her 50s stepped out, rain speckling her glasses. She rushed toward me without hesitation. "Honey, don't move," she said, dialing her phone with one hand. "Help's coming." Her voice was the first one that carried actual concern all night. It was steady, grounding, and for the first time since the crash, I let myself believe I might survive. The next minutes blurred, paramedics kneeling beside me, straps securing my body, the hiss of oxygen as a mask was fitted over my face. The world tilted and jolted as they lifted me onto the gurney. The last thing I saw before the ambulance doors shut was the empty stretch of wet road, the rain still falling in thin silver threads. Somewhere out there, my family was already moving on with their night, as if I had never been in the car at all. The ambulance rocked gently as it sped through the rain-slick streets, sirens wailing in the distance. I stared at the ceiling, trying to keep my focus on the cold air rushing from the vents above me instead of the pain radiating from my leg and shoulder. A paramedic adjusted my oxygen mask, his eyes scanning the monitor beside me. "You're going to be okay," he said, his tone calm but efficient. It was the kind of reassurance that came from someone who had seen far worse, and for a moment, I believed him. But as the minutes ticked by, a different thought gnawed at me. They hadn't even called the ambulance themselves. A stranger, a woman whose name I didn't even know, had been the one to stop, to kneel in the rain beside me, to dial 911 without hesitation. When we reached the emergency bay, the doors swung open to a rush of fluorescent light. The smell of antiseptic hit me before the gurney rolled over the threshold. Voices overlapped, nurses calling out vitals, the paramedic briefing a doctor, the squeak of rubber soles on tile. They wheeled me into a curtained bay and began working, 4-line in, vitals checked, my soaked clothes cut away with surgical scissors. A nurse asked for a guardian's number, and I gave them both my mother's and father's phones. She wrote them down and handed the information to someone else without looking at me twice. Hours passed. My leg was splinted, my arm wrapped, my cuts stitched. The clock on the wall read 2 a.m. when I realized no one had come. The curtain rustled occasionally as nurses passed by, but there was never a familiar face. "Still no guardian," a voice asked from somewhere beyond the partition. "Not yet," a nurse replied. "We've left 2 messages." By the time Vera finally walked in, it had been over 6 hours. She didn't rush to my side. She didn't touch me. She didn't even remove her sunglasses. Instead, she set her purse on the chair and said, "They're charging extra for every hour. We need to go." Rhett trailed behind her, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room like he was bored at a DMV line. "You didn't answer," I said, my voice hoarse. "We were busy," Vera replied, signing the discharge papers with brisk strokes. "And you wrecked the car. You'll have to help pay for that." I blinked at her, stunned. "I was driving Zania to her class," I murmured. Vera didn't flinch. "Next time, watch the road." Rhett finally spoke, his tone as flat as ever. "You're not paralyzed. Be thankful." They didn't ask how I felt. They didn't ask if I was in pain. The nurse handed me a bag with my damp, wrinkled clothes inside, and I dressed slowly, wincing with every movement. As we walked out to the SUV, the cold night air stung my cheeks. I moved awkwardly on the crutches they'd given me, each step a reminder of what had happened. Vera unlocked the doors from a distance, climbed into the driver's seat, and started the engine without looking back. There was no small talk on the drive home. No questions. Only silence, thick and suffocating. And somewhere in that silence, I understood, I could have died, and they still would have made it to Pilates on time. The house looked exactly as it had the day before the crash, warm light spilling from the kitchen, the faint scent of Vera's rose diffuser hanging in the air. Nothing about it suggested that one of its residents had just spent the night in an emergency room. Zinnia was curled up on the living room couch, wrapped in a plush throw blanket, scrolling through her phone. She didn't glance up when I limped past, the rubber tips of my crutches tapping against the hardwood floor. I paused in the hallway, listening. Vera's voice carried from the kitchen, talking on speakerphone. It was just a minor scare, she told someone, probably another salon client. Zinnia handled it so well, and she still made her appearance. That girl is dedicated. I felt my stomach turn. Handled it so well? She'd stepped over me. Left me bleeding in the rain. And now she was the hero of the story. When Vera hung up, she breezed into the living room, tablet in hand. She didn't even look at me. "You're dripping," she said absently, gesturing toward the couch cushions. "Those were expensive." I looked down at myself. My bandages were dry. I wasn't dripping anything. She hadn't even noticed. Upstairs in my room, nothing had changed, same old sheets, same crooked lamp no one had bothered to fix, the closet half filled with Zinnia's overflow clothes. I lowered myself onto the bed, careful of my leg, and reached for my phone. It had finally finished charging, and the screen lit up with notifications. Most of them were from social media. Against my better judgment, I opened Instagram. The first thing I saw was Zinnia's latest post, a mirror selfie, her hair perfectly curled, throwing a peace sign. The caption read, "Drama, but still slayed." #blessed. Over 1,000 likes. Dozens of comments praising her resilience. "Your fam is iconic. You're the strong one, girl. Hope your sister's okay, but you ate." I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. They were talking about me like I was a footnote in her glamorous recovery arc. A nameless inconvenience that had interrupted her schedule. I didn't comment. I didn't like the post. I just locked the phone and set it face down on the nightstand. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the SUV's taillights disappearing into the rain, felt the cold seeping into my bones, heard Rhett's voice, "She can crawl out." By morning, the house was quiet again, not peaceful, just muted. Rhett sat at the kitchen counter with his coffee, eyes on the news. Vera was already gone. Zinnia lounged on the couch, tapping her nails against the phone screen. Not a single person asked me how I was feeling. It was then I realized something: I wasn't invisible. I was being erased. My pain, my place in this family, my side of the story, it was all being cut away, replaced by a version that suited them better. And erasure, I thought, was worse than being unseen. Because when you're erased, you start to wonder if you were ever there at all. It started with a stack of mail Vera had carelessly dropped on the side table in the dining room. Most of it was addressed to her or Rhett, salon supplier invoices, glossy catalogs, and a few medical statements. I wouldn't have noticed anything unusual if my own name hadn't been printed across one thin, white envelope. I waited until the room was empty before I slid it into my lap. My crutches made it slow going back upstairs, each click of the rubber tips on the wood floor making me tense. I shut my bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed, the envelope balanced in my good hand. The first envelope was just a bill from the hospital, standard charges for the ER visit, splinting, stitches. The second was a copy of my discharge papers. But the third made my fingers go cold. It was stapled to the back of the hospital folder, half buried under the paperwork. Request to access patient life insurance policy. Filed less than 12 hours after the crash. The box for deceased or critically incapacitated was checked. At the top, my full name. In the section marked policyholder, Vera's name. I stared at it so long the letters blurred. Surely, it couldn't mean what it looked like. Surely, it was some kind of clerical mistake. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, but I grabbed my phone and dialed the hospital's main line anyway. After being transferred twice, a woman in patient records answered. I gave her my name and asked as calmly as I could if a request for my life insurance had been filed during my stay. There was a pause on the line, just long enough for my skin to prickle. Yes, she said finally. We had an inquiry on file. It was denied because you were still actively in care. Is something wrong? I didn't answer. I just hung up. The room felt smaller than it had a moment ago, like the walls were inching closer. I slid down onto the floor, my injured leg stretched awkwardly in front of me, the paper still clenched in my fist. She had thought I was going to die. No, she had prepared for it. Maybe even hoped for it. My mind replayed the night of the crash in sharp fragments. The SUV's taillights fading away, Vera's voice caring only about a Pilates class, the way they didn't come to the hospital until hours later. Each memory layered itself on top of the others, and the picture it formed was darker than I was ready for. I stayed on the floor for over an hour, staring at nothing. The pain in my leg throbbed in time with the pounding in my skull. When I finally moved, it was with a strange kind of clarity. I opened my desk drawer, pulled out a worn manila folder, and slid the insurance paper inside. Then I reached for my laptop. If Vera could put my name on a death benefit request before I'd even left the operating room, I could start keeping records of my own. Not just about the crash, but about every time my existence had been an inconvenience to her. Every slight. Every dismissal. Every time she'd erased me to polish someone else's image. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was preservation. Evidence. And for the first time since the accident, I felt something other than hurt or shock. I felt alert. The insurance discovery should have been enough to shatter me. Instead, it made me look harder, dig deeper. If Vera could cross that line without hesitation, what else had she taken? The answer came sooner than I expected. I was sorting through an old stack of school folders one rainy afternoon when I found it, my scholarship acceptance letter from the year before. I remembered the day it arrived. I'd ripped the envelope open in this very room, my heart pounding as I read the words congratulations. It had been my way out, my proof that I could be something beyond the boundaries of this house. But something about the letter in my hands felt wrong. The paper was slightly thinner than I remembered, the ink just a shade off. Holding it to the light, I saw it. The signature line where my guidance counselor had signed was no longer ink. It was a photocopy. And the date had been altered. I felt a rush of heat in my face. I limped to my desk, powered on my old laptop, and pulled up the scan I'd made the day I first got it. There it was, the original, a bold, in-ink signature, the correct date. 2 documents, 2 different versions of my future. I logged into the scholarship portal with trembling fingers. Under current academic cycle recipient, my stomach dropped when I saw the name, Zinnia Lancaster. It wasn't a typo. My mind raced, connecting dots I hadn't wanted to see. The school paperwork Vera had shoved in front of me when I was still groggy in the hospital. The smile when I signed without reading. "That's my good girl," she'd said. I found her in the kitchen that evening, pouring lemon water into a tall glass. She glanced up at the paper in my hand but didn't flinch. "That was mine," I said, my voice low. She tilted her head, almost amused. "It went to the person who would use it. It was addressed to me." "And what would you have done with it, Faye?" she asked, as if we were discussing a misplaced grocery coupon. "You can barely keep up. Zinnia already has the connections. She presents well. You hide." My pulse pounded in my ears. "I'm not hiding," I said, steady despite the tremor in my hands. She shrugged. "What's yours is what you fight to keep. You didn't fight." I stared at her, something cold settling in my chest. "Then maybe I start." Her smile faltered just slightly, but she turned away, sipping her water as if the conversation had already ended. It hadn't. Not for me. After that conversation, I stopped expecting anything from Vera except another betrayal. Instead of arguing, I began documenting. Every word, every slight, every theft. I pulled an empty binder from my closet and labeled it in black marker, evidence. Inside went the altered scholarship letter, the insurance request form, and the original scan of my acceptance. I added printed screenshots of Zania's Instagram posts that turned my pain into her personal brand, captions dripping with faux resilience, comments praising her for handling tragedy so gracefully. The binder grew quickly. I started carrying a small notebook in my bag, jotting down overheard remarks, dates, times. Rhett's offhand comments, Vera's casual dismissals, even the exact words she'd used the night of the crash, she can crawl out. I wanted them all on record. When I found an old voicemail Zania had left on a mutual friend's phone, one she'd forgotten I had access to, I saved it to a flash drive. Her voice was light, almost laughing, "She's too soft. She wouldn't last a semester." Every piece was a brick in a wall I was quietly building. Not to confront them, not yet. But to have something solid when the time came. The more I collected, the more I realized how much they had relied on my silence. My quiet had always been their cover. And now, every page I filed was another crack in that shield. At night, I kept the binder under my bed, alongside a small lockbox holding the flash drive and a few official documents, my birth certificate, driver's license, and the originals of anything I knew they might try to misplace. There was a strange comfort in the ritual of it. Sorting, labeling, protecting. It made me feel less like a victim of their rewriting and more like the author of my own record. I didn't know exactly what I'd do with it all, but I knew one thing: when I moved next, I wouldn't move empty-handed. It was just past 3 in the morning when I decided I wasn't going to wake up in that house ever again. The decision didn't come with a rush of adrenaline or some cinematic moment, it was quiet, steady, like the sound of a lock clicking open. I had been lying awake for hours, the glow from the street lamp outside cutting pale stripes across my bedroom wall. My binder of evidence was already zipped into my backpack. I'd packed light: a birth certificate, driver's license, insurance paper, flash drive, a couple pairs of jeans, 2 sweaters, my walking boots. No photos, no journals. Nothing sentimental they could weaponize. I moved slowly, careful not to let the floorboards creak. The hallway was dark except for the faint light under Vera's door. She was probably still awake, scrolling her endless feeds or drafting emails for the salon. Rhett's muffled snore came from the master bedroom. Downstairs, the kitchen was cold. I left a note on the counter: no envelope, no flourish. If I am a burden, then I will no longer ask to belong. I didn't sign it. They'd know. Outside, the air was sharp with the bite of early morning. My knee ached in the chill, but I kept going, crutches clicking softly on the driveway. I didn't look back at the house. The bus stop was 5 blocks away. The streets were empty except for the occasional porch light and a raccoon that darted into the shadows. When the bus arrived, the driver glanced at me, backpack, crutches, hoodie pulled tight, but didn't ask questions. I fed 4 crumpled dollar bills into the machine and found a seat near the back. The ride was quiet, the hum of the engine steady beneath me. I watched the city pass in patches of neon and shadow. No calls. No texts. Not even a missed notification from home. By the time the bus let me off in a quiet residential neighborhood, dawn was beginning to smear pale gold along the horizon. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly 2 years. "Mr. Harris, it's Faye. Can I come by?" He answered within minutes. Doors open. When I arrived, he stood in the doorway in a worn robe, gray hair mussed, eyes kind. "You look like someone who needs one adult to say yes," he said. I could only nod. He didn't ask for an explanation. He led me down a narrow hall to a small guest room with peeling wallpaper and a bed that squeaked when I sat on it. It wasn't much, but it was mine, for now. I set my bag down and felt something inside me loosen, just enough to breathe. That morning, for the first time in weeks, I slept without waking to the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. Mr. Harris never asked how long I planned to stay. On the second morning, he handed me a bowl of oatmeal, poured coffee into a chipped mug, and said, "There's a temp agency 3 blocks down. Tell them I sent you." The job they gave me wasn't glamorous, answering phones at a call center, reading from a script about overdue payments. The headset pinched, the hours dragged, and people hung up on me more often than they listened. But it was mine. The paycheck was small, yet every deposit felt like a foothold on a steep cliff I'd been clinging to for years. Each evening, I walked back to the guest room with my earnings and a few grocery bags. I kept every receipt in a small envelope. I didn't know what I'd need proof for, but I knew the habit mattered. My nights became a strange mix of exhaustion and obsession. After work, I sat cross-legged on the squeaky bed with my laptop open, reading everything I could about community college enrollment, financial aid, and state laws on minors living independently. Technically, I was still 17, but the world had stopped treating me like a child a long time ago. Some nights, I pushed deeper into subjects that had nothing to do with school, property leases, business registration, liability insurance. I didn't have a business idea yet, but I wanted to understand how control was taken and kept. The guest room slowly began to change. The peeling wallpaper was hidden under thrift store posters I bought for $1 each. A second-hand lamp from the charity shop replaced the harsh ceiling light. I even found an old desk at a yard sale and spent an entire Saturday sanding it down, repainting it pale blue. Mr. Harris passed by as I worked and said, "Looks like you're making it yours." "No one else's name on the lease," I replied without looking up. "That's how it should be," he said, and kept walking. 2 weeks after I'd moved in, I signed up for an online course in trauma counseling through a local community college. The tuition was manageable with part-time hours, and the thought of helping people who had lived through something like me felt steadying. It was the first decision in years that felt entirely my own. I didn't tell Vera. I didn't tell Rhett. I didn't even tell Zania. This wasn't for them. At night, I'd close my laptop, turn off the light, and lie in bed listening to the radiator knock in the corner. I thought about the binder hidden under my bed and the growing list of evidence inside. This wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about building something that no one could take, twist, or erase. The idea came to me on an otherwise ordinary Thursday evening, when I was at the library flipping through county property records. I'd been using the public computers there because the internet at Mr. Harris's was slow, and the hum of the place kept me focused. I wasn't looking for Vera. I was researching case studies about small businesses losing their leases, but a familiar name caught my eye. The Salon. Vera had always spoken about it like it was her empire, a permanent fixture with her name etched into the foundation. But the records told a different story. She didn't own the building. She leased it. And the owner, Gerald Myers, was a 78-year-old retiree who lived 3 towns over. A note in the file mentioned he was interested in liquidating properties before relocating to Florida. That detail lit up in my mind like a neon sign. If Vera didn't own the salon's walls, she didn't control its future. Someone else did. And if that someone else was looking to sell or transfer leases, then the permanence Vera relied on was nothing more than paperwork waiting for a signature. I spent the next week learning everything I could about Gerald. His name appeared in old local newspaper clippings, once as the sponsor of a charity golf tournament, once in a business profile praising his practical approach to property investment. He had no children listed in any public records I could find, just a handful of distant relatives in another state. When I finally decided to reach out, I did it under my legal name, but not the one Vera had given me at birth. I'd filed to use my middle name and a variation of my last name when I enrolled in college, Dr. Faye Morgan. The doctor wasn't a lie. It was a trainee designation for counseling students in my program, one I was entitled to use in certain professional contexts. It also sounded authoritative enough to make someone take me seriously. I emailed him first, introducing myself and explaining my interest in leasing a small commercial space for a youth counseling and resilience center. I didn't mention Vera, not even once. I knew he'd connect the dots when he saw the address I was asking about, right next door to her salon. He replied within 24 hours, inviting me to meet him at a diner off the interstate. Gerald was a tall, wiry man with a careful way of speaking, like he weighed each word before letting it out. Over black coffee and a plate of eggs, I laid out my vision, a place where teens and young adults who'd survived trauma could find support, resources, and community. Somewhere safe. Somewhere I wished I'd had when I was 17. "You want the unit next to the salon," he said finally, studying me. "Yes," I replied. "You're related, aren't you?" I took a sip of coffee. "Let's just say we used to be close." He nodded slowly, then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Make it yours," he said, sliding the lease across the table. I didn't let my hands shake when I signed. Leaving the diner, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and quiet determination. This wasn't just an opportunity. It was the opening move in a game Vera didn't even know we were playing. She'd spent years erasing me from her narrative. Now I was about to write myself back in, right next door to her kingdom. The keys to the unit felt heavier than they should have, a small cluster of metal and possibility. When I first stepped inside, the air was stale and faintly dusty, carrying the scent of a space that hadn't been lived in for months. The front windows were covered in a thin film, muting the view of the street. I could still see the edge of Vera's salon sign from here, just enough to remind me of where I'd come from. The room itself was modest, a narrow reception area, a single hallway, and 3 back rooms that could be whatever I needed them to be. I ran my fingers along the walls, imagining the transformation, warm lighting instead of flickering fluorescence, shelves lined with books on resilience, a bulletin board covered in resources and encouraging notes, soft chairs that didn't squeak under shifting weight. I wanted every detail to feel like the opposite of what my teenage years had been. No judgment, no cold silences, no spaces where you felt like you were just taking up room. Over the next month, I worked quietly. I painted the walls a soft, pale blue, the same shade I'd used for the desk in my room at Mr. Harris's. I thrifted furniture, choosing mismatched but comfortable chairs. The old reception desk got a fresh coat of white paint, and I found a second-hand sign printer to create a simple banner. The resilience room. I spent evenings designing intake forms, privacy policies, and a sliding scale fee structure so that money wouldn't be the barrier it had been for me. By day, I kept my job at the call center, saving every extra dollar to cover the first 6 months of rent and utilities. Sometimes, when I left for the night, I'd catch a glimpse of movement in Vera's salon. Once, I saw her through the window, laughing with a client, completely unaware of the new life growing just steps away. It didn't make me angry. Not anymore. It made me patient. On the final night before opening, I stood in the middle of the space with the lights low. The air smelled faintly of lavender from the diffuser I'd set up. The walls, the chairs, the desk, it was all ready. I thought about the girl I'd been the night of the crash, sitting in the dark, bleeding and waiting for someone to come back for her. This place was my answer to her. I locked up and slipped the keys into my pocket. There was no need to announce anything. Not yet. The real moment would come when it mattered most. And I already knew when that would be. The morning of Vera's annual Spring Beauty Showcase dawned bright and unseasonably warm, the kind of day that seemed designed for photo ops. Across the street, her salon windows glittered with gold and pastel banners, glow into spring. The sidewalk was lined with vases of fresh flowers, their scent already drifting toward me as I sipped my coffee in the quiet of the resilience room. I had been waiting for this day for weeks, marking it in my planner in neat, bold ink. Timing was everything, not just to show what I had built, but to reclaim the hours, the years, the seasons she had stolen from me. I arrived at my space before dawn, unlocking the door with the keys Gerald had given me. The air was cool, calm, scented faintly of lavender. Everything was exactly where I wanted it, intake forms stacked neatly, chairs arranged in small, welcoming circles. In the reception area, my laptop was already queued with the new message I'd display on the screen. At 7:45 a.m., I crossed the short hallway that connected my front door to the salon's shared building entrance. I moved quietly, methodically. First, I removed the posters she had taped to the shared entry window, her signature pink cursive spelling out exclusive offers. I replaced them with my own understated flyer: "This event has been cancelled. For inquiries, please contact the Resilience Room." Inside the salon, the front desk monitor was unlocked. I slid in a flash drive, replacing her welcome slideshow with a simple, stark banner in white text on a dark slate background: "This space is now managed by Dr. Faye Morgan." On the counter, I placed a framed card with one line in neat black lettering: "She can crawl out." I didn't linger. I locked the front door behind me, went back to my own space, and waited. By 9 a.m., the guests began arriving. Clusters of local influencers in coordinated outfits, mothers and daughters in matching floral dresses, salon regulars with gift bags swinging from their wrists. I could see them from my window as they paused, frowned, read the new notices. At 9:30, the SUV pulled up. Zinnia stepped out first in a peach suit, phone already in hand, sunglasses reflecting the crowd. Vera followed, heels clicking, Rhett trailing behind like an afterthought. I stepped into the salon's front reception just as they did. The moment Zinnia's eyes met mine, her coffee cup slipped from her hand, shattering against the tile, espresso pooling at her feet. Vera froze, her gaze flicking from the framed card on the desk to the banner on the screen. Recognition was instant, and so was the tension in her jaw. "What are you doing here?" she asked, voice low but sharp. "Just helping with operations," I said evenly. She pushed past me toward the desk, but stopped cold when she saw the envelope I had left for her there. She opened it slowly, her hands tightening on the paper as she read the notarized termination notice. "You don't own this building," she snapped. "I do now," I replied, my voice carrying just enough to reach the guests lingering nearby. "And your lease expired 60 days ago. You were notified." "You tricked us," she hissed. "No," I said, meeting her eyes. "You ignored the paperwork." I followed it. A ripple of murmurs passed through the crowd. One of her former stylists, a woman who had left the salon months ago, stepped forward. "You did this?" she asked me quietly. I nodded once. "Good," she said. "About time someone did." Zinnia muttered something under her breath and pushed past the crowd, disappearing out the door. A few clients followed her. Others shook their heads, tore up their event flyers, and dropped them in the trash. Vera stood rigid, her knuckles white around the notice. "You've embarrassed your family," she said finally. "You did that all by yourself," I answered. She inhaled sharply, as if to argue, but I didn't wait for her to finish. I straightened the framed card on the desk, turned toward the door, and stepped out into the spring sunlight. Behind me, the salon was quieter than I'd ever heard it. The days following the showcase were eerily quiet. I didn't post about what had happened. I didn't answer the curious messages trickling into my inbox. I just kept showing up to the Resilience Room, unlocking the door each morning as if nothing monumental had shifted across the street. But the shift was obvious. By the second day, Vera's salon was no longer booked solid. The once bustling mornings slowed to a trickle of hesitant customers. Some came in, glanced around, and left without sitting down. Others stayed, but the laughter and hum of blow dryers seemed thinner, weaker. On the third day, Zinnia's face popped up in my email. The subject line read, "One last ask." She wanted to rent the salon space for a one-time event, a redemption showcase to rebuild the family brand. It would be nice to remind people of our legacy, she wrote. I didn't reply right away. I reread the email twice, sipping my tea, and then opened a blank message in my business account. 2 words, request denied. I added a third sentence, legacy revoked. Less than an hour later, a screenshot of my reply appeared on a local lifestyle blog. By nightfall, the headline was circulating, Revenge or Reckoning? Anonymous owner denies infamous influencer's return. The comments section was brutal. Finally, someone stood up to them. Long overdue. She earned that no. I didn't add my voice to the noise. The truth was already working on its own. Inside the resilience room, my focus stayed on the people who walked through my door. Teens with hunched shoulders who avoided eye contact. Parents who whispered their gratitude as they left. The work was steady, grounding, nothing like the flash and burn of Vera's world. Still, I knew the silence on their side was temporary. Storms always were. The resilience room didn't open with fanfare. There were no ribbon cuttings or press releases. Just a few chairs, a pot of coffee, and the quiet promise that whoever walked in would be seen. One afternoon, a girl named Kayla stepped through the door. 16, thin as a wire, eyes fixed on the floor. For the first 2 sessions, she barely spoke. By the 5th, she managed a smile. By the 8th, she laughed, a quick, startled sound like she didn't expect it to come out. When spring came, we hosted a small ceremony, our first ever. 30 people crammed into the front room, a handful of teachers who donated supplies, parents of students who had stayed clean for 6 months, and Kayla, standing at the podium with note cards in her trembling hands. I don't have a lot of people in my life who say, I'm proud of you, she began. So when someone said it here, I didn't know what to do. She sniffled, smiled at the floor. But now I say it to myself. And that's because of this place. I handed her the certificate we'd made, the paper warm from the printer. You don't need their applause to be proud of yourself, I said softly, just loud enough for the room to hear. She broke into tears, and the room erupted in applause. I didn't cry, but something inside my chest loosened, like a thread that had been wound too tight for years finally gave a little slack. The next week, I spoke on a small trauma survivors panel downtown. No cameras, no press, just folding chairs in a circle and people carrying invisible weight in their shoulders. I used to think justice was an apology, I told them. Now I think justice is being able to tell the truth out loud, without asking permission. Heads nodded around the circle. Later that night, I returned to the guest room at Mr. Harris's. My binder was still under the bed, the evidence intact. But I didn't look at it. I didn't need to. That chapter wasn't gone, but it was no longer the one holding the pen. A few days later, Rhett showed up unexpectedly, standing in the reception area with a grocery bag. Inside were photographs, me as a child at the beach, holding a science fair ribbon, sitting in the background of Zania's birthday parties. At the bottom, a folded note. I should have done more, he said quietly. You still can, I replied. He didn't ask how. I didn't tell him. It was late afternoon when Vera's name appeared on my phone screen for the first time in months. The message was short, with no greeting, so, you've won. Hope it was worth it. I stared at it for 3 seconds, then hit delete. No screenshot, no draft reply. It didn't deserve to live anywhere in my world. That evening, I stayed late at the resilience room. The last group session had ended an hour ago, the chairs still arranged in a circle. I walked between them, fingertips brushing the backs, thinking of the conversations they'd held, the laughter that had surprised people mid-sentence, the long silences that finally gave way to truth. On the wall behind my desk hung 2 framed photographs. One was me at 6 years old, gap-toothed, clutching a stuffed raccoon I'd carried everywhere. The other was from the day we opened this place, me in a simple dress, scissors in hand, eyes steady on the ribbon. The knock at the window was soft, almost hesitant. I looked up to see Vera standing outside on the sidewalk, framed by the fading light. She didn't come in. She didn't wave. She just stood there for a moment, staring through the glass, before turning away. Her silhouette seemed smaller than I remembered. No one called after her. A few days later, someone sent me a screenshot of Zania's latest video. She was promoting a new line of hair extensions, smiling brightly, curls perfect. The caption was hollow, the comments section quieter than I'd ever seen it, no heart emojis, no gushing praise. Just silence. And somehow, that silence echoed louder than any insult could have. That night, I locked up as usual. The sign on the door flipped to closed, the alarm set, the lights switched off one by one. Outside, the street was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of the lampposts. I paused on the sidewalk, looking up at the painted words across the window, the resilience room. I thought about the girl in the rain 6 years ago, pinned under shattered glass, waiting for someone to come back. She never could have imagined this place, walls painted the color of calm, a reception desk that greeted instead of dismissed, a circle of chairs where no one was left out. I whispered to her then, in my head, we made it out. And we built something better. The air was cool, the kind that made you breathe a little deeper. I didn't feel the need to look over my shoulder, didn't expect anyone to follow me. That was the point. Sometimes healing doesn't look like forgiveness. Sometimes it's a room you build so no one else has to crawl out alone. And this time, I wasn't crawling. In the quiet aftermath of Faye's journey, one truth stands out: loyalty, courage, and truth are not inherited, they are chosen. The people who should have stood by her were the ones who turned away, yet she refused to let their betrayal define her. Instead, she found the courage to walk away from a place that only took, to rebuild her life brick by brick, and to claim her own narrative without asking for permission. Her resilience was not born from grand gestures but from the quiet, relentless decision to keep going, to collect the truth like precious stones, and to use it not for revenge, but for building something that would outlast the lies. This story reminds us that loyalty means standing with someone when there is nothing to gain, that courage often looks like leaving the familiar in order to protect your own dignity, and that the truth, once spoken, has a way of breaking chains more effectively than anger ever could. The greatest justice is not an apology from those who wronged you, but the life you create in defiance of their expectations. If there is one philosophy to carry forward, it is this: you are not defined by who leaves you behind, but by what you choose to build after they're gone. Sometimes, the most powerful act of healing is not forgiving those who left you bleeding, it is making sure no one else has to crawl out alone.